I stood in the doorway of the ballroom at the Riverside Country Club, watching my husband of 38 years lean in close to his assistant, his hand resting just a little too long on the small of her back. The string quartet was playing something soft and expensive, probably Vivaldi or one of those composers that rich people pretend to recognize. The champagne flutes caught the light from the crystal chandeliers, hundreds of little prisms throwing shadows across the marble floor. Everyone in that room represented money, success, the kind of prosperity that takes decades to build. And there was John, 69 years old, acting like a teenager who just discovered what attraction feels like. I felt something crack inside my chest, not like a sudden break, but like ice that has been weakening for months finally giving way under pressure. Julia Simpson stood there in a dress that probably cost more than most people's mortgage payment, laughing at something John said, her hand touching his forearm in that casual way that stops being casual when you have been married as long as I have. The fabric was emerald green, silk or maybe satin, and it caught the light every time she moved. She knew exactly what she was doing. This was the annual gala for DP Loans Inc., the company John and I built together from nothing back when we were young and stupid and believed that hard work and loyalty meant something. The question burning in my mind was simple. How long had this been going on? And the second question, the one that made my hands shake as I gripped my evening clutch, was this. Did everyone in this room already know except me? Was I the joke? The oblivious wife who smiled and hosted parties while her husband paraded his mistress around like a prize? And here is the third question that would change everything. What was I going to do about it? Because standing in doorways, feeling sorry for yourself, does not change anything. It just makes you complicit in your own humiliation. If you are enjoying this story, hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell me where you are watching from. This channel shares real-life experiences sent by viewers, and while we protect privacy by changing names and details, the emotions and situations are absolutely real. The stories you hear might be inspired by multiple accounts and adapted for a general audience. We are here to connect, reflect, and sometimes find a bit of justice in the chaos. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this story gets complicated fast, and you need to understand how deep this betrayal really went. I want to take you back for just a moment, because you need to understand what John and I built together. We started DP Loans Inc. in 1987, working out of a tiny office above a hardware store in suburban Cleveland. The office smelled like sawdust and paint thinner from the store below. We had 2 desks, 1 filing cabinet, and a phone that we shared. John handled the client-facing work, the schmoozing, the golf games, the networking lunches at the Cleveland Athletic Club where deals got made over steaks and scotch. I handled everything else. The underwriting, the risk assessment, the books, the legal documents, the compliance filings that could bury you if you made one mistake. My father had been an accountant for 40 years before he retired, one of those old-school numbers guys who could look at a ledger and tell you within 5 minutes if something was off. He taught me that numbers do not lie, even when people do, especially when people do. I remember sitting at our kitchen table with John, both of us in our 20s, splitting a frozen pizza because we could not afford takeout, filling out the incorporation papers by hand because lawyers cost money we did not have. My hand cramped from writing. John looked at me that night, his eyes bright with this vision he had of our future, and he said we were partners, 50-50 in everything. He said it with such certainty, such conviction, that I believed him completely. Why would I not? We were married. We were building something together. We were going to be one of those power couples you read about in business magazines. And for 38 years, I did believe him. We bought our first house together in 1991, a modest colonial in Shaker Heights, with a mortgage that terrified us both, because it was more than we had ever owed on anything. The house had good bones, but needed work. We spent weekends painting rooms and fixing the porch and planting bushes in the front yard. John used to joke that I was the brain and he was the charm, and together we made something bigger than either of us could do alone. But here is the detail nobody talks about when they tell success stories. I was the one who caught the error in our first major loan package, the one that would have bankrupted us before we even got started. A decimal point in the wrong place. Simple mistake. Fatal consequences. I found it at 11 o'clock at night, 2 days before closing, sitting at our kitchen table going through the paperwork one more time because I could not sleep. I was the one who restructured our debt in 2008, when the housing market collapsed and every bank we knew went under. I was on the phone for 16 hours a day, renegotiating terms, explaining our position, convincing creditors that we were different, that we were careful, that we would survive when others would not. John was good at relationships, I will give him that. But relationships do not mean anything when the math does not work. And I was the one who, month after month, year after year, made sure the math added up. Do you think anyone remembers that at galas like this? Do you think John remembered? The thing that haunted me as I watched John and Julia together was not just the obvious attraction, though that was painful enough in a way that felt almost physical. It was the realization that I had somehow become invisible in my own company, in my own marriage, maybe in my own life, like I had faded so gradually that nobody noticed until I was basically a ghost. Julia had been hired 2 years ago as John's executive assistant. The position had been open for months after his previous assistant, a lovely woman named Margaret, who had been with us for 15 years, retired to take care of her grandchildren. I was on the hiring committee. I interviewed Julia myself. She was smart, I will give her that. Wharton MBA, 5 years at Goldman Sachs. The kind of resume that opens doors and turns heads. She wore a navy suit to the interview, conservative but perfectly tailored, and she spoke with this confidence that made you believe she could handle anything. John insisted we needed someone with fresh perspective, someone who understood the new digital lending landscape, the fintech disruptions, the changing regulatory environment. He talked about bringing the company into the 21st century like we were some relic from the Stone Age. I agreed, because it made sense on paper. The world was changing. Maybe we needed someone who understood that world better than we did. But watching them together now, I could see the way he looked at her, like she had invented electricity or discovered fire, like every word out of her mouth was profound wisdom instead of corporate speak dressed up in a Wharton vocabulary, the way he dismissed my opinions in meetings when she offered a contradicting view. It started subtly. He would say something like, "Well, Julia makes an interesting point. Maybe we should consider that approach." Then it became more direct. "Kate, I think you are not quite understanding the current market dynamics here. Let Julia explain her perspective." And eventually it was just silence when I spoke, like my words did not even register. The way he started working late 3-4 nights a week, always with Julia, always on some urgent project that could not wait until morning. I asked him once why these meetings had to happen after hours. He said it was the only time they could focus without interruptions, that the office was too chaotic during the day, which was funny because our office had never been chaotic. We ran a tight ship. Everyone knew their role, but I let it go because that is what I did. I let things go. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I told myself I was being paranoid or insecure or whatever women my age are supposed to feel when younger women enter the picture. And now, at this gala that we hosted every year to celebrate our success and court new investors, he was practically parading her around like a trophy. The question lodged in my throat was this: was I watching my marriage end? Or had it ended years ago and I just refused to see it? And the clock started ticking in my head then, a countdown I could not name, but could definitely feel. Something was going to happen. Something had to break. Because I could not stand in doorways and watch my own life dissolve for one more minute without doing something about it. I made myself walk into that ballroom like nothing was wrong. That is what we do, is it not? Women of my generation, we smile and we host and we make sure everyone else is comfortable even when we are dying inside. We learned it from our mothers, who learned it from their mothers, this performance of gracious composure, no matter what personal hell you are living through. I wonder if any of you have ever had to choose between your pride and your peace, between making a scene and swallowing poison. It is one of those impossible choices where every option feels like losing. I moved through the crowd, shaking hands, accepting compliments on my dress, which was a deep blue silk that I had worn to these galas for 3 years running, because nobody really looks at the 63-year-old wife anyway, thanking people for coming, smiling until my face hurt. The mayor was there, a jovial man named Tom Patterson, who told the same stories every year about the old days in Cleveland politics. Our state senator, Barbara Chen, elegant and sharp as always. The president of First National Bank, Richard Morrison, no relation despite the shared last name. All of them eating our catered food and drinking our top-shelf liquor and celebrating the empire that I helped build with my own 2 hands. The irony was not lost on me. John caught my eye from across the room and gave me this little wave, this casual gesture like we were acquaintances at a cocktail party, not people who had shared a bed for almost 4 decades, not people who had built this entire evening together. Julia was still beside him, and I noticed for the first time that she was wearing sapphire earrings. Sapphires. My brain stopped for a moment. John gave me sapphire earrings for our 35th anniversary 3 years ago. He said they matched my eyes. He said sapphires represented wisdom and loyalty. I almost laughed at that memory now. The earrings Julia wore were different from mine, more modern, probably more expensive, but the choice of stone could not be a coincidence. Could it? I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself to calm down and breathe and not jump to conclusions. But then Marcus Green, one of our oldest investors, came up to me with a concerned look on his face that immediately made my stomach clench. Marcus was 72, semi-retired, and had been with us since the beginning when we were just kids with a dream and no money. He invested $20,000 in 1988 when that was real money, when that could have meant the difference between survival and bankruptcy. We had paid him back tenfold over the years. He pulled me aside near the dessert table, away from the main crowd, and lowered his voice. "Kate," he said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you aware of the structural changes John has been discussing with the board?" I felt my stomach drop, that sensation like you are in an elevator that suddenly descends too fast. "What structural changes, Marcus?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his dress shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. "The equity redistribution proposal, the new partnership track for key executives. John said you were on board, that you two had discussed it extensively, but the way he talks about it, I get the feeling maybe you are not as involved as you used to be, and I wanted to hear it from you directly before the vote next week." This was news to me. Complete, absolute, devastating news. I had not heard anything about equity redistribution or partnership tracks or any structural changes whatsoever. Nobody had mentioned any vote next week, but I did what I always do, what I have perfected over decades of business dealings. I smiled. I kept my voice steady. I told Marcus that John and I were still discussing the finer points, and we would have something concrete to present at the next board meeting. That we wanted to make sure all the details were ironed out before bringing it to a formal vote. Marcus nodded, but he did not look convinced. His eyes were kind but skeptical, like he was humoring a child who was lying about eating cookies. "Kate," he said quietly, "if you need anything, if you need advice or support, or just someone to talk to, you know where to find me." I thanked him and excused myself, walking to the bathroom as calmly as I could manage, even though my heart was pounding so hard I thought people might hear it. I locked myself in one of the stalls and just stood there breathing, in through the nose, out through the mouth, like I was in some meditation class. What equity redistribution? What vote? I pulled out my phone and opened my email, searching for anything from the board. Nothing. I checked the shared calendar for DP loans. There was a board meeting scheduled for next Friday at 10 in the morning. The agenda was marked as confidential. I had never been locked out of a board agenda before. Never. I composed myself and went back out to the party, but everything felt different now. Every conversation, every smile, every handshake felt like part of some performance I had not been told I was in. I watched John work the room with Julia at his side, and I started noticing things. The way board members looked at them with approval. The way Julia touched his arm to get his attention, and he immediately turned to her like she was the most important person in the world. The way he introduced her as our executive vice president, which was not actually her title. She was his executive assistant, but nobody corrected him. And then I saw something that made everything click into place. Patricia Chow, one of our board members who ran a venture capital firm focused on financial technology, was talking intently with Julia. Not John, Julia. I drifted close enough to overhear fragments of their conversation. Patricia was saying something about due diligence and growth projections and market positioning. Julia was responding with detailed numbers, specific strategies, talking about our company like she owned it, like she was the one making decisions. Patricia saw me and smiled warmly. "Kate," she said, "Julia was just filling me in on the expansion plans. So exciting. I did not know what expansion plans she was referring to. I smiled and nodded like I was in on the secret, and that is when I realized. This was not just an affair. This was a coup, a carefully planned, methodically executed corporate coup where I was being slowly, quietly pushed out of my own company while everyone smiled and pretended it was normal business evolution. I found John an hour later in the hallway outside the banquet room, finally alone for a moment, checking his phone with a slight frown. I walked up to him and kept my voice steady, low enough that nobody passing by would hear. "We need to talk," I said. He looked annoyed, that flicker of irritation that crosses someone's face when they are interrupted from something they consider more important. He glanced back toward the party like I was pulling him away from something crucial. "Now? Kate, we have 200 people in there, investors, clients, the mayor. This is not the time for whatever this is." "Yes, now," I said, and I felt my composure starting to crack. "Marcus just asked me about equity redistribution. You want to tell me what that is about?" John sighed, running his hand through his silver hair in that gesture he does when he wants to appear exasperated but patient. He still looked good for 69. I will give him that. Tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who wore a tuxedo like he was born in one. He played tennis 3 times a week and golfed on Sundays, and he took care of himself in a way that men of his generation often did not, which made the whole Julia situation feel even more cliché. "Kate," he said in this patronizing tone, "we can discuss this later. This is not the time or place for business conversations. We are at a party." "No," I said, and I could hear my voice getting louder despite my best efforts. "No, John, this is exactly the time and place. You have been making decisions about our company without consulting me. You have been working late with Julia every night for months. And now I find out you are proposing structural changes that would affect my ownership, and you did not even mention it? You did not even mention it, John. How is that acceptable?" He put his hand on my arm, and his grip was not gentle. It was controlling. "Lower your voice," he said quietly, his jaw tight. "You are making a scene. People are going to hear you." "A scene," I repeated, and I almost laughed, except nothing about this was funny. "I am making a scene? You have been humiliating me all night, John, hanging all over your assistant like I do not exist, like our 38 years of marriage do not exist. And now you are making business decisions behind my back? Decisions that affect my financial future, my ownership stake in the company I helped build?" His jaw tightened, and I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Not anger exactly. Contempt. Pure contempt. "Julia is a valued member of our team," he said carefully, like he was explaining something to a child. "And the equity proposal is about bringing in new talent and staying competitive in a changing market. If you had been paying attention to the business instead of playing bridge 3 times a week and having lunch with your friends, you would know that. You would understand the pressures we are facing. But you checked out years ago, Kate. You stopped caring about growth and innovation. You are stuck in 1990 thinking that what worked then will work now. Playing bridge." I stared at him. I played bridge on Tuesday afternoons, 1 afternoon a week, with 3 women I had known since Emily was in elementary school. That was my crime? Taking 3 hours a week for myself after dedicating 40 years to building our company? After raising our daughter and managing our household and handling every crisis we ever faced? Do you know what I realized in that moment? He meant it. He actually believed that I had stopped contributing, that I had become dead weight, that Julia, with her fancy degree, and her tight dresses, and her digital transformation buzzwords, was somehow more essential than I was. More essential than the woman who caught the mistakes, who managed the risk, who kept us afloat when everyone else was drowning. And right then I knew. This was not about attraction or midlife crisis, or even infidelity, though that was probably part of it too. This was about erasing me. This was about rewriting history so that John was the sole genius behind DP Loans Inc., and I was just the wife who came along for the ride, who maybe helped out a little in the early days, but really had nothing to do with our success. He was editing me out of our own story. I did not sleep that night. Could not sleep. John came home around 2 in the morning, claiming he had to make sure the venue was properly closed down and the vendors were paid. Which was interesting because we had an event coordinator whose entire job was handling those details. I lay in our bed, the king-size bed we had bought 5 years ago when John insisted we needed to upgrade, staring at the ceiling fan going around and around, listening to him move around in the bathroom, the sound of water running, the electric toothbrush, the medicine cabinet opening and closing. When he finally slid under the covers, he turned his back to me. No good night, no explanation, no acknowledgement of our conversation. Just the wall of his shoulders and the sound of his breathing evening out as he fell asleep within minutes, like a man with no conscience whatsoever. I got up around 4 and went downstairs to my office, the small room off the kitchen where I still kept all my files, all my records, everything that proved I was not crazy and I was not useless. The room smelled like paper and coffee because I kept a small pot brewing when I worked. I pulled out the original incorporation documents from 1987, the ones we had filed with the state of Ohio. There it was, in black and white, typed on an actual typewriter, because that is what you did back then. Kate Elizabeth Morrison and John David Becker, equal partners, 50% ownership each. I had taken his last name when we married in 1985, but my stake in the company had always been separate, clear, legally documented. So what was this equity redistribution Marcus was talking about? How could John change my ownership without my consent? Unless he was not planning to ask for my consent. Unless he was planning to do it anyway, and hope I did not notice or did not care, or did not have the energy to fight. I opened my laptop and logged into the company's shared drive, something I realized I had not done in months, because John always said he would keep me updated on anything important. He said there was no need for me to waste time sorting through all the administrative documents and board materials. He would handle it and brief me on anything relevant, which I now understood was code for keeping me in the dark. I found a folder labeled Board Proposals, dated 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Inside was a document titled Partnership Restructuring Initiative, and my hands were shaking as I opened it. I started reading, and the words blurred together for a moment, because I could not quite believe what I was seeing. The proposal outlined a new structure where John would retain 60% ownership as founder and CEO, while key executives including Julia Simpson's would receive equity stakes totaling 30%, with the remaining 10% held in reserve for future incentives and strategic hires. My name appeared once, in a footnote that was probably designed to be overlooked. Kate Becker, to transition to advisory role, compensated via annual consultancy agreement not to exceed $200,000. Advisory role, consultancy agreement, $200,000 a year for a company that generated $15 million in annual profit. They were pushing me out, not firing me, because that would be too obvious, too legally messy, too likely to raise red flags with investors who knew my role in building the company, but reducing me to a part-time consultant with no real power, no ownership, no voice, no vote. And the document was scheduled to be voted on at the board meeting next Friday. 6 days. 6 days from now. How had I not known about this? The answer was obvious and humiliating. John had stopped including me in board communications months ago, maybe longer. He claimed he did not want to overwhelm me with administrative details. He said I had earned the right to step back and enjoy my life instead of being buried in paperwork. He said he would handle the business side and I could focus on family and personal projects, on the things that made me happy. What a fool I had been. What a complete, trusting, stupid fool. Here is the clock ticking louder now, a countdown that felt like a timer on a bomb. 6 days until the board vote. 6 days to figure out what was real and what was a lie. 6 days to decide if I was going to fight or roll over. 6 days to find out if I had any power left at all or if John had already won. I did something I had never done before, something that felt both desperate and necessary. I called a lawyer, not our company lawyer, Dan Peterson, who played golf with John every Sunday morning and considered John his best friend. Not any of the corporate attorneys we used for contracts and compliance. A different lawyer, Harry Taylor. Harry was 70 years old, semi-retired, mostly doing estate planning and will preparation for elderly clients who wanted to make sure their grandchildren were taken care of. But he had been a friend of my father's back in the day, back when they were both young men trying to make something of themselves in Cleveland. My father trusted Harry completely, said he was one of the most honest men he ever knew, and honesty was what I needed right now. I called him at 6:30 in the morning, knowing he was an early riser. He answered on the second ring, his voice alert despite the hour. Kate Morrison, he said, and I could hear the surprise. Or Kate Becker now, I suppose. It has been years. How is your father? Retired and happy, I said. living in Arizona with his girlfriend. Harry, I need your help. I need it quickly, and I need complete confidentiality. There was a pause. What kind of help are we talking about? The kind where my husband is trying to steal my company, and I need to know if I can stop him. Another pause, longer this time. Come to my office at 8, he said. Bring every document you have. I met him at his office in Lakewood, a small suite above a pharmacy, the kind of modest professional space that lawyers used before everything became glass towers and marble lobbies. His secretary was not in yet. Harry made coffee in an old percolator that probably dated back to the 70s. We sat at his conference table, which was scarred wood that had seen decades of use, and I spread out everything I had brought: the incorporation documents, the restructuring proposal, printouts of the corporate calendar showing the board meeting, the operating agreement from 2003 when we had formalized certain procedures as the company grew. Harry read through it all slowly, methodically, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad with a pen that clicked when he pressed the top. When he finished, he looked at me over those glasses with an expression that was part concern and part anger. "Kate," he said, "did you sign anything recently? Any amendments to the original incorporation agreement? Any updates to the operating agreement? Any documents that might have changed your ownership structure?" I shook my head. "Nothing," I said. "I have not signed anything except the annual tax returns and the standard year-end corporate documents. Nothing that would change my ownership stake. Nothing that would authorize John to make these kinds of decisions without my consent." Harry nodded slowly. "Then this restructuring proposal is not legal," he said flatly. "You own 50% of DP Loans Inc. as period. Full stop. John cannot unilaterally change that without your written consent. Even if the board votes to approve it, even if they all sign off on it, it does not change your ownership stake. That is protected by the original incorporation documents and by Ohio state law. Corporate structure cannot be changed without the consent of all owners. That is basic contract law." I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been tight and painful since the gala. "So what are they trying to do?" Harry leaned back in his chair, which creaked. "My guess? They are hoping you do not know better. They are hoping you are not paying attention or that you do not understand corporate law. They present this to the board, it gets approved, and then they start operating as if it is reality. They issue new operating agreements, new equity certificates. By the time you realize what happened, the company has been restructured, new contracts are in place, Julia has signing authority, and you would have to fight a long legal battle to undo it. It is not legal, but it is effective if the victim does not push back. And the sad truth is, most people do not push back. They accept what they are told. They trust. I looked at Harry and felt something shift inside me, from shock and betrayal to something colder and sharper. "So, what do I do?" He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a lawyer who sees an opportunity for justice. "You show up at that board meeting, Kate. You walk in there with me beside you, and you remind them who actually owns this company. We will file an injunction to prevent any vote on the restructuring. We will send formal notice to every board member that any vote to change corporate structure without your consent is void and exposes them to personal liability. And maybe, just maybe, we find out what else John has been doing without your knowledge. Because in my experience, when someone is willing to commit one kind of fraud, there are usually others. I wonder if any of you have ever felt that moment when you realize you have been underestimated so completely that people actually think you will not fight back. It is almost funny. Almost. Like they looked at you and saw someone so weak, so compliant, so beaten down that they could do whatever they wanted and face no consequences. But underestimation is a gift if you know how to use it, because it means they are not prepared for what comes next. The next few days were strange in a way that felt almost surreal. John acted like nothing had happened, like we had not argued at the gala, like he was not actively trying to destroy my financial future. He kissed my cheek in the morning before he left for work, the same dry kiss he had been giving me for years, asked me what I wanted for dinner, mentioned that we should probably book our usual winter trip to Florida soon. Maybe rent that condo in Naples we liked. It was like the gala never happened, like our argument in the hallway never existed, like he was not actively conspiring to steal my company from me. And the scariest part was how normal he seemed, how convinced he was that this was just regular life. I played along. I smiled. I made dinner. I asked about his day. How was work? Did the Peterson deal close? Is the new compliance officer working out? And all the while I was gathering documents, taking screenshots, forwarding emails to a private account Harry had set up for me with a secure password that John would never guess. I went through our shared drives systematically, searching for anything that looked unusual, and I found things. So many things. Evidence of 2 years of financial decisions I had never approved and had never even seen. Bonuses for Julia that exceeded what senior vice presidents made. $75,000 last year. $100,000 this year for an executive assistant. A company credit card in her name with a $50,000 monthly limit. The statements showed charges at high-end restaurants, luxury hotels, a weekend spa retreat that cost $8,000. All supposedly business expenses, consulting fees paid to firms I had never heard of, all of them connected to John's college buddies or golf partners. $200,000 to JD Consulting for market analysis, $350,000 to Riverside Strategic Partners for digital transformation advice. I looked up these companies. They were basically shell corporations with no real employees, no track record, no actual work product. Money laundering dressed up as legitimate business expenses. It was not embezzlement exactly, because technically John had the authority to make those decisions as CEO. Our operating agreement gave him discretionary spending up to certain limits for business purposes. But this was not business. This was personal enrichment. This was funneling company money to friends and to Julia, and probably to himself through these fake consulting firms. And when I added it all up, we were talking about close to $2 million over 2 years. $2 million I had known nothing about. On the third day, while I was going through files in my office, Emily called. Our daughter lived in Boston now, worked for a tech startup doing something with artificial intelligence and user experience design. She visited maybe twice a year if we were lucky, usually for Thanksgiving and maybe a long weekend in summer. She had her own life, and I did not blame her for that. We had raised her to be independent, to chase her dreams, to build her own success. But when she called, her voice was tight in a way that immediately put me on alert. "Mom," she said, "I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me." I felt my pulse quicken. What did he say? Because I knew John had gotten to her first. Emily hesitated. "Dad called me yesterday. He was really upset. He said you have been having some problems, memory issues, confusion. He said you have been forgetting things and getting paranoid, and he is worried about you. He said you accused him of having an affair at the gala in front of board members. He said you do not remember conversations you have had, decisions you agreed to. He asked me if I had noticed anything when I visited at Christmas, if you seemed off or confused or forgetful. Memory issues, confusion, paranoid." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Your father is lying to you, Emily. I am not confused, and I am not paranoid, and I am not having memory issues. He is trying to push me out of the company, and he is laying the groundwork to make everyone think I am incompetent. He is trying to steal my ownership stake, and he needs people to believe I am not capable of managing my own affairs." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mom," Emily said finally, and her voice was careful. "Are you sure? Because Dad sounded really concerned, really genuine, like he was scared for you, and I hate to say it, but you are 63. Early onset dementia is not that uncommon in people your age. Is it possible you are just not remembering some conversations? Is it possible Dad has been trying to protect you, and you are misinterpreting his intentions?" And there it was, my own daughter, primed to believe her father over me, because he got to her first with his narrative, because he sounded genuine and concerned and loving, because what kind of father would lie about something like that? I told Emily I had to go. I told her we would talk later. I told her I loved her, even though right then I felt like I did not know her at all. And then I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this whole thing started. Not gentle crying. The kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and painful, the kind that leaves you gasping. Not because I was weak, because I was realizing how deep this betrayal went. John was not just taking my company. He was taking my credibility, my reputation, my relationship with my own child. He was destroying everything, and he was doing it with such calculated precision that I almost had to admire the strategy, even as it was tearing me apart. This was a scorched earth campaign, total warfare. and I had been so busy trying to understand why that I almost missed the how. Almost, but not quite. Harry filed an emergency injunction on Thursday morning, 3 days before the scheduled board vote. The filing was 40 pages of legal argument establishing my ownership rights, citing the incorporation documents, referencing Ohio corporate law, and demanding that any vote on restructuring be prohibited until proper notification and consent procedures were followed. He also filed a formal complaint with the Ohio Secretary of State's office regarding irregularities in corporate governance at DP Loans, Inc. That complaint triggered an automatic review of our corporate filings and structure. The state does not take corporate fraud lightly, especially when it involves potential theft from minority owners. Except I was not a minority owner. I was a 50% owner, and Harry made that very clear in every document he filed. The injunction was granted by a judge that same afternoon. No vote could take place on the restructuring proposal until a hearing was held on my ownership claims. That hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday, which meant the Friday board meeting was suddenly pointless. John called me at 4:30. His voice was ice. "What did you do, Kate?" I was sitting in my office, Harry beside me, and I put the phone on speaker. "I protected my interests, John. I filed an injunction to prevent you from stealing my company." There was silence. Then, "You brought a lawyer into our marriage? Into our business? After everything we built together, you are attacking me with lawyers?" I almost laughed. "I am attacking you? You have been planning to cut me out for years. You conspired with your mistress to restructure the company without my knowledge. You have been paying yourself and your friends through fake consulting firms. You told our daughter I have dementia, and I am attacking you?" More silence. "Kate," he said finally, his voice different now, more dangerous, "you have no idea what you have just started. You think you can fight me? You think you can win? I built this company. Me. My relationships, my reputation, my work. You were just the bookkeeper. Nobody is going to side with you when this gets ugly, and it is going to get very ugly." I looked at Harry, who nodded. "Then let it get ugly, John, because I am not backing down." I hung up before he could respond. My hands were shaking, but I felt clear-headed for the first time in weeks. This was war. Fine. I knew how to fight. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on Friday morning, despite the injunction, because apparently John wanted to proceed with all other business, even if the restructuring could not be voted on. Harry and I arrived at 9:55, walking into the conference room at DP Loans headquarters like we owned the place, which technically I did, 50% of it anyway. The office was on the 14th floor of a modern building in downtown Cleveland, all glass and steel and expensive furniture. We had moved here 5 years ago when the old office got too small. I remembered arguing with John about the cost. He said we needed to project success to attract the right clients. He said image mattered in financial services. I said we were over-leveraged and should wait another year. He overruled me. The board members were already seated around the long mahogany table. Marcus Green, Patricia Chow from 2nd Street Capital wearing one of her signature red blazers, Robert DeLuca, who ran the commercial lending division, a numbers guy who had been with us for 12 years. Linda Morrison, no relation, who handled residential lending and had a reputation for being ruthlessly efficient. And at the head of the table, John, with Julia sitting immediately to his right with a stack of presentation folders in front of her, looking composed and professional in a charcoal suit. The injunction had been served to all board members yesterday afternoon. They knew we were coming, but judging by the surprised looks on their faces, they had not expected us to actually show up. John looked up when I walked in, and I saw genuine surprise flash across his face, followed quickly by calculation. "Kate," he said smoothly, "I did not realize you were planning to attend. This is primarily an administrative meeting, nothing that requires your presence." I pulled out the chair directly opposite him and sat down. "I am a 50% owner of this company, John. Every meeting requires my presence unless I choose otherwise, and I am choosing to be here." Harry sat down next to me, setting his briefcase on the table with a decisive thunk. "And this is Harry Taylor," I continued, "my attorney. He is here to ensure that all decisions made today are legally sound and properly documented, to ensure that my rights as an owner are respected." The room went very quiet. You could hear the air conditioning, the traffic outside, someone's phone buzzing on vibrate. John recovered quickly, putting on his smooth smile, the one he used with difficult clients. "Of course," he said. "You are always welcome at board meetings, Kate. Although I wish you had given me a heads up that you were bringing outside counsel. It might have saved some confusion." Harry pulled out a folder. "No confusion on my end, John. I have reviewed the incorporation documents for DP Loans, Inc., and I am here to ensure they are honored. Specifically the clause that establishes equal ownership between you and Kate, and the clause that requires unanimous owner consent for any structural changes." John's smile tightened just slightly. "Great," he said. "Well, let us get started then." He nodded at Julia, who stood up and started distributing the presentation folders. "Given the injunction filed yesterday," she said in this smooth corporate voice, "we will table the discussion of the partnership restructuring initiative pending legal resolution. However, there are several other items on today's agenda that require board attention. We will be reviewing the Q3 financial results, discussing the proposed expansion into the Charlotte market, and voting on the year-end bonus structure for senior management." She clicked to the first slide on the screen at the end of the room. "But before we begin, I want to address the elephant in the room. The injunction filed by Mrs. Becker raises questions about corporate governance and decision-making authority that I think we need to clarify." Julia looked at me then, and her eyes were cold. "Mrs. Becker, can you tell the board when you last attended a management meeting? When you last reviewed our risk assessment protocols? When you last participated in client relationship development?" I stared at her. "Excuse me, when?" she repeated. "Did you last contribute to the actual operation of this business beyond signing tax returns?" I felt Harry's hand on my arm, a gentle warning to stay calm. "That is not a relevant question," I said. "My ownership stake is not dependent on my level of day-to-day involvement. I own 50% of this company, regardless of whether I attend weekly meetings or quarterly meetings or no meetings at all. Ownership and management are separate issues." Julia smiled, and it was not friendly. "Are they? Because from where I sit, you have been absent for years while John and I have been building this company into what it is today. You want ownership without contribution. You want profit without work. That is not how successful businesses operate. This was the play. This was how they were going to do it. Not by changing the ownership documents, because the law protected me there, but by arguing that I was a passive investor who had abandoned active participation, who had forfeited my right to equal say in company decisions. They were going to marginalize me through narrative instead of through legal restructuring. Clever. Almost. I stood up, and I did not raise my voice, but I made sure everyone could hear me. "Let me tell you a story," I said. "In 1992, DP Loans was 3 months from bankruptcy. We had overextended on a commercial property deal, and the market turned. John wanted to take out a bridge loan at 18% interest to cover the shortfall. I said no. I restructured our existing debt, renegotiated terms with our creditors, and cut our operating expenses by 30%. We survived. In 2008, when the housing market collapsed, John wanted to keep lending aggressively because our competitors were failing and he saw an opportunity to grab market share. I said no. I pulled back, tightened our underwriting standards, and focused on our existing clients. We survived when Lehman Brothers did not, when Bear Stearns did not, when half the banks in this country went under. I looked at Julia. In 2016, when we were considering the move to this office, John wanted to lease 50,000 square feet at market rates. I said we only needed 30,000 and we should negotiate a below-market rate with free months up front. We saved $4 million over 5 years. So do not stand here and tell me I have not contributed. Do not stand here and pretend that John built this company alone. Because the reason DP Loans still exists, the reason any of you have jobs, is because someone was paying attention to risk. Someone was doing the math. Someone was making sure we did not get so caught up in growth and ambition that we destroyed everything we built. The room was silent. Patricia was looking at her hands. Robert was staring at the table. Marcus had this small smile. I sat back down. Now, I said, let us talk about the Q3 financials, and maybe someone can explain why Julia Simpson's received a $100,000 bonus last year when our policy caps executive assistant bonuses at $25,000. Julia's face went pale. John cleared his throat. That bonus was performance-based, he said. Julia took on additional responsibilities last year. Project management, strategic planning, investor relations. She functioned more as a chief of staff than a traditional assistant. Fine, I said. Then her title should reflect that. And her compensation should go through the standard approval process that requires board review for any payment over $50,000 to a single employee. Did this bonus go through board review? More silence. I pulled out a folder of my own, one Harry and I had prepared, because I do not see any board minutes documenting approval of a $100,000 payment to Julia Simpsons. I also do not see board approval for the $75,000 bonus she received the year before, or the company credit card with a $50,000 monthly limit, or the $200,000 paid to JD Consulting, which appears to be a shell company with no employees and no work product, or the $350,000 paid to Riverside Strategic Partners, which is registered to an address that is actually a UPS store in Akron. I slid copies of my documentation across the table to each board member. So let me ask the board a question. Were you aware that approximately $2 million in company funds have been spent over the past 2 years on payments that lack proper documentation and approval? Were you aware that our CEO has been making significant financial decisions without board oversight? And were you aware that while these questionable payments were being made, a proposal was being developed to dilute my ownership stake? Patricia picked up the documents and started reading. Her face changed. Marcus was already flipping through pages, his frown deepening. Robert looked up at John. These consulting firms, he said. I do not remember voting to approve these contracts. I do not even remember discussing them. That is because you did not, I said. John approved them unilaterally under his discretionary spending authority, which technically he is allowed to do for amounts under $100,000. But when you add them all up, when you see the pattern, it starts to look less like business expenses and more like personal enrichment. Harry leaned forward. The injunction I filed prevents any vote on corporate restructuring, but it does not prevent this board from taking action to address potential financial irregularities. You have a fiduciary duty to all owners of this company to ensure corporate funds are being used appropriately. You have a responsibility to investigate any evidence of self-dealing or conflicts of interest. And based on these documents, I would say you have significant evidence that warrants investigation. John stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous, he said. You are taking routine business expenses and twisting them into some conspiracy theory because you are angry about Julia. This is personal, Kate. This is not about business. It is about your insecurity and your jealousy, and your inability to accept that the company has evolved beyond your understanding. I stood up too. Then let us have an independent audit, I said. Let us bring in a third-party forensic accountant to review every payment, every contract, every expense from the past 3 years. If everything is legitimate, if everything is properly documented and serves a valid business purpose, then you have nothing to worry about. But if we find irregularities, if we find evidence of misuse of company funds, then we deal with it appropriately, which might include removal of officers who have breached their fiduciary duties. You are threatening to fire me, John said, and his voice was shaking. From the company I built, Kate, not you, me. No, I said quietly. I am threatening to hold you accountable. There is a difference. Marcus cleared his throat. I move that we authorize an independent financial audit of DP Loans, Inc., covering the past 3 years, with special attention to consulting contracts and executive compensation. All in favor? Patricia raised her hand. Then Robert. Then Linda. The vote was 4-0, with John abstaining because he was the subject of the audit. It was over. Not the war, but this battle. John walked out of the conference room without another word. Julia gathered her folders and followed him, her heels clicking on the floor. And I sat there thinking about how strange it was that you could know someone for 40 years and still not really know them at all. But John was not done. Of course he was not done. On Thursday, exactly 1 week after the contentious board meeting, I came home from a grocery run to find him sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of papers. Not documents, legal papers with blue backing sheets. Kate, he said, and his voice was flat, emotionless. We need to talk. I set the grocery bags on the counter, my heart already sinking because I knew what was coming. I am listening, I said. He slid the papers across the table toward me. I want a divorce, he said, and I want to buy you out of the company. Here is my offer. Fair market value for your shares based on an independent valuation. A clean split. We end the marriage and we end the business partnership, and we both move on with our lives. I picked up the papers with hands that wanted to shake, but I would not let them. It was a separation agreement combined with a purchase offer for my shares in DP Loans. The terms were laid out in dense legal language: division of marital assets, spousal support calculations, and buried in the middle, the buyout offer, $15 million for my 50% stake in the company. I looked at John. "You are offering me $15 million for a stake in a company worth $40 million, I said. "That means my half is worth $20 million. You are lowballing me by $5 million. He shrugged, and the casualness of the gesture made me want to throw something. "That is the fair market value after accounting for the key man discount. Without me, the company is worth less. I am the face of DP Loans, Kate. I am the one with the relationships, the reputation, the industry connections. If I walk away, the business loses at least 30% of its value. So your stake is worth less than you think. You can take the offer, or we can go through a messy divorce and a business valuation fight that will cost us both a fortune in legal fees and drag out for years. Your choice." I sat down across from him. "You are serious," I said. "You are actually going to blow up our marriage and try to force me out of the company because you want to be with Julia." He laughed, and it was not a nice sound. It was bitter and harsh. "You think this is about Julia? Kate, this is about the fact that I have been running this company by myself for years while you played bridge and had lunch with your friends and checked out of everything that mattered. Julia is talented and driven, and she actually cares about growing the business, about innovation, about staying competitive. You have been coasting on my success for decades. You stopped contributing years ago, but you still want to collect the profits. This is me taking back what is mine, what is rightfully mine." I felt something cold settle in my chest, something that burned like ice. Here is what you need to know about rage, real rage, the kind that burns clean and focused. It does not make you yell or cry or throw things. It does not make you lose control. It makes you calm. It makes you strategic. It makes you see clearly for the first time in a long time. I looked at John, and I felt nothing but clarity. No pain, no sadness, no regret. Just absolute crystal clear understanding of who he was and what he was trying to do. "No," I said. "No to the divorce on these terms. No to the buyout at this price. And if you file papers anyway, I will make sure every client, every investor, every business contact we have knows exactly how you tried to defraud your own wife. I will make sure your reputation is shredded. I will make sure everyone in Cleveland's financial community understands what kind of man you really are. And I will fight you for every single dollar of marital assets we have accumulated over 38 years. By the time I am done, John, you will wish you had been honest with me from the start. You will wish you had come to me like a partner and tried to work something out, because now you have made an enemy out of the one person who knew all your secrets." He filed for divorce the next morning. The papers were served to me at 10 a.m. by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the envelope. But here is the thing John forgot, or maybe never knew in the first place. I was not just the bookkeeper. I was not just the person who made sure the math added up. I was the person who understood every single financial decision we had made for 4 decades. Every investment, every property purchase, every retirement account, every stock option, every piece of our financial lives. And I had documentation for all of it because that is what I do. I document. I keep records. I save emails. Harry brought in a forensic accountant, a sharp woman named Dana Chen, who specialized in marital asset cases, particularly high net worth divorces, where one spouse tried to hide assets. Dana had worked for the IRS for 15 years before going into private practice. She knew every trick, every loophole, every strategy people use to hide money. She went through our books like a surgeon, tracking every dollar, every investment, every piece of property from the day we got married to now. And she found things. So many things. Community property that John had tried to hide by putting it in his name only. An investment account with $800,000 that he had somehow forgotten to disclose. A vacation house in Hilton Head that he claimed was a business asset purchased by the company, but had actually been bought with marital funds 13 years ago and used primarily for our personal vacations. Dana traced the purchase back through tax returns and bank statements and proved it was marital property, a retirement account with over $3 million that he had somehow forgotten to mention in his initial financial disclosure. $3 million. Just forgot. Dana presented her findings to John's lawyer 2 weeks after the divorce filing. The message was simple. If this goes to court, John loses big. Not only would he have to split our marital assets 50-50, which would include all the property he tried to hide, but his attempt to conceal assets would look very bad to a judge. Ohio is not a community property state like California. It is an equitable division state, which means judges have discretion in how they divide assets. But one thing judges in Ohio absolutely hate is spouses who lie about assets in divorce proceedings. They see it as a breach of trust, a violation of the duty of candor to the court. And when they find that kind of behavior, they tend to punish it. John's lawyer called Harry the next day to renegotiate, but it was too late for that, because Dana had found something else, something bigger, something that changed everything. She found emails between John and Julia going back almost 3 years, not just flirty messages, but detailed discussions about how to structure the company to edge me out. The emails had been deleted from John's work account, but Dana was able to recover them from the company server backup. There were references to the equity restructuring plan dating back to when Julia was first hired. "I need to make sure Kate is comfortable with a reduced role," John had written. "Maybe we position it as stepping back to enjoy retirement. She is 61 now, probably ready to slow down anyway." Julia had responded, "Once we have the new structure in place, it will be easier to manage her expectations. We just need to control the narrative with the board. Keep her out of strategic discussions so she does not have context to object." There were jokes about keeping me in the dark. One email where Julia called me the ghost in the machine, still technically present, but increasingly irrelevant. Another where John referred to me as legacy baggage that we need to handle delicately. There were explicit conversations about how John would handle the divorce and the buyout once they had everything in place. The timeline was clear. Get the equity restructuring approved. Establish Julia as a key partner with real power and real ownership. Then file for divorce and offer me a buyout that seemed fair on paper, but was actually significantly below market value. By the time I figured it out, they would control the company, and I would be fighting from a position of weakness. This was not an affair that turned into a business problem. This was a conspiracy that involved an affair. A 3-year plan to steal my company and my life. And the thing about conspiracies is that they leave evidence. They require communication, and communication can be recovered. Harry sent a letter to John's attorney on a Tuesday morning laying out everything we had found. The hidden assets, the deleted emails, the 3-year plan to defraud me of my ownership stake. And then Harry included something else, a timeline showing that Julia had been making decisions and signing documents on behalf of DP Loans Inc. without proper authorization. She had signed consulting contracts. She had approved expense reports. She had negotiated with vendors and made commitments on behalf of the company, all without being an officer or having any legal authority to bind the corporation. That is fraud. Not the marriage kind, the criminal kind. Unauthorized use of corporate authority, possibly wire fraud if any of those communications crossed state lines. And if John wanted to keep fighting, if he wanted to drag this divorce through the courts and try to lowball me on the business valuation, we were prepared to turn that evidence over to the state attorney general's office. We were prepared to file a criminal complaint. And John, with his reputation in the Cleveland business community, with his networking and his golf games and his carefully cultivated image, would be destroyed. Not just divorced, not just bought out, destroyed. I got a phone call at 6 a.m. the next day. It was John, and he was crying. Actually crying. His voice was breaking, raw in a way I had never heard before. "Kate," he said, please, we need to talk. I cannot do this anymore. This is killing me. We need to talk. Please, I am begging you." I thought about hanging up. I thought about letting him suffer the way he had made me suffer. But there was something in his voice, something broken and desperate, and despite everything he had done, I could not quite kill the part of me that remembered loving him. I met him at a diner near our house, a place called Molly's that we used to go to for breakfast on Saturday mornings back when we were young and broke and happy, when the biggest decision we had to make was whether to get pancakes or omelets. The parking lot was half empty. It was 7:30 on a Wednesday morning. John was already there, sitting in a back booth, and he looked terrible. Unshaven, his silver hair uncombed, his shirt wrinkled like he had slept in it, or maybe not slept at all. His eyes were red. He had aged 10 years in 2 weeks. He ordered coffee when I sat down but did not drink it, just wrapped his hands around the mug like he needed something to hold on to. "I ruined everything," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Kate, I am so sorry. I do not know what I was thinking. Julia," she got in my head. She made me feel like I was younger, more important, more relevant, like I still had something to prove. And I convinced myself that you did not care about the business anymore, that I was doing all the work, that you had checked out. But I was wrong. I was so wrong. I saw the emails, Kate. I saw what Dana found. And I sat there reading them, and I could not believe that was me, that I wrote those things, that I thought those things about you, about us. And now Julia is gone. She quit yesterday, moved to California, and the board is furious with me. And Marcus is talking about calling for my resignation, and I am facing potential fraud charges, and I just want to fix this. Please, tell me how to fix this. I looked at this man I had spent 40 years with and felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even pity. Just emptiness, like looking at a stranger who happened to have a familiar face. "You cannot fix this, John," I said. "What you did, it was not a mistake. It was not a lapse in judgment. You tried to steal from me. You conspired with your mistress for 3 years to destroy my financial security. You humiliated me in front of our colleagues. You turned our daughter against me by telling her I had dementia. You deleted emails and hid assets and lied in legal filings. That is not something you fix with an apology. That is a betrayal so deep, so calculated, so complete, that there is no coming back from it." He reached across the table for my hand. I pulled away before he could touch me. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, and there were actual tears running down his face. "Tell me what you want, and I will do it. Anything. I will do anything." I stood up. "I want you to sign over the house in Hilton Head to me, free and clear," I said. "I want you to agree to a fair business valuation by an independent appraiser, and I want the option to either buy you out or force a sale of the company. I want 60% of all marital assets because you hid property, and that is the penalty for dishonesty. And I want a formal apology sent to the board and to our daughter, admitting what you did, admitting the conspiracy, admitting the fraud. Do all of that, and I will not press charges. I will not turn the evidence over to the state attorney general. I will let you keep whatever reputation you have left. Refuse, and I will make sure everyone knows exactly who you are. Your choice, John. You wanted choices. There is yours." He signed everything. It took 2 weeks to finalize, 2 weeks of negotiations between lawyers, 2 weeks of document preparation and notarizations and filing paperwork with courts and corporate registries. But he signed it all. The property transfer for Hilton Head, the agreement to independent business valuation, the consent to give me 60% of marital assets, the letter to Emily explaining that he had lied about my mental state because he was trying to justify his affair and cover up his plan to defraud me. That last one was the hardest for him, I think. Admitting to our daughter that he had lied about me, that he had weaponized her concern and used it to isolate me. But he did it. And Emily called me crying after she read it. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel triumphant or satisfied or justified. I just felt tired. 40 years is a long time to be with someone, and even when they betray you, even when they try to destroy you, there is still this ghost of who they used to be that haunts you. The young man who split frozen pizza with me and dreamed big dreams. The father who held Emily when she was born and cried because he was so happy. The partner who used to ask my opinion on everything because he said I was smarter than him. That man was gone, maybe had been gone for years, and I was only now accepting it. John moved into an apartment downtown, one of those modern high-rises with floor-to-ceiling windows and amenities he would never use. Julia disappeared completely from our lives. Rumor had it she took a job in San Francisco with a tech startup, but I never confirmed it, and I did not care enough to look. Let her be someone else's problem. The independent valuation came back 3 months after the divorce was filed. DP Loans Inc. was worth $42 million, not 40, which meant my 50% stake was worth $21 million. John's lowball offer of $15 million would have cheated me out of $6 million. $6 million. That is retirement money. That is security. That is the difference between comfortable and wealthy. And he was willing to steal it from me without blinking. The board at DP Loans brought in a new COO after the audit revealed the extent of John's unauthorized spending. Her name was Linda Harris, a competent 54-year-old woman who had run the lending division at KeyBank for 12 years before semi-retiring to consult. She had gray hair that she wore short and professional, a no-nonsense attitude, and a reputation for turning around struggling divisions. She was exactly what we needed. Linda and I started rebuilding the company culture, getting back to the fundamentals that had made us successful in the first place. Solid underwriting based on real risk assessment, not gut feelings or relationships. Conservative loan-to-value ratios, taking care of clients instead of just chasing profits and market share. We lost a few clients who wanted the aggressive lending approach, the stretch financing that John had started offering in recent years. But we kept the good ones, the solid businesses and individuals who appreciated stability over flashiness. Revenue actually increased by 8% in the first year after John stepped down. 8%. Because it turned out that careful risk management and client retention were better strategies than reckless growth. Who knew? Well, I knew. I had always known. Within a year of the restructuring, I made the decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I offered to buy out John's remaining stake in the company. Not because I wanted to own everything, because I wanted him completely gone. The independent appraiser gave us a formula for valuing his shares based on current revenue and projected growth. I paid him $18 million, financed partly through company cash reserves and partly through a small business loan that I had no trouble securing because DP Loans was now profitable and stable. John signed the purchase agreement without negotiating. I think he just wanted out, wanted to be done with the whole mess. He took his $18 million and moved to Arizona near Emily, who by that point was speaking to him again in limited doses. Forgiveness is complicated. She forgave him enough to have a relationship, but not enough to forget what he did. Some wounds leave scars. Emily came home in October, about 10 months after everything exploded. It was a surprise visit. She did not call ahead, just showed up at my door on a Saturday afternoon with a suitcase and red eyes. She sat in my living room, the one I kept after John moved out because I liked the garden and the big windows that let in afternoon sun. The living room where we used to have Christmas mornings and birthday parties and all those ordinary moments that make up a life. And she cried, deep, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. "I am so sorry, Mom," she said when she could finally speak. "I am so sorry I did not believe you. I should have known Dad was lying. I should have trusted you. But he is my father, and he sounded so convincing, and I just did not want to think he could be that awful. I did not want to believe that the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and told me I could do anything would lie about something so important." I hugged her tight, this daughter I had raised, this woman who looked so much like me at her age. "It is okay," I said, even though part of me was not sure it was, even though there was still a small wound where her doubt had cut me. But she was my daughter. She was 29 years old and trying to navigate an impossible situation. And sometimes you forgive people, not because they completely deserve it, but because holding on to anger is too heavy to carry forever. Because loving someone means accepting that they will hurt you sometimes, even when they do not mean to. We spent that weekend together, just talking. Really talking for the first time in years. She told me about her life in Boston, about the tech startup where she worked, about the man she had been dating who turned out to be married, about how watching what happened with me and John had made her question every relationship, every trust, every promise. She said she looked at couples now and wondered if they were really happy or just performing happiness, if anyone really knew the person they were with, or if we were all just guessing. I told her that what happened with her father did not mean all relationships were doomed. That betrayal was real, but so was love. That sometimes people fail us, and sometimes they do not. The trick was learning to trust your own judgment, to pay attention to actions instead of words, to value yourself enough to walk away when necessary. I told her I wished I had learned those lessons earlier, that I had wasted years trying to be the perfect partner, the perfect business partner, trying to make John happy, even when I was slowly erasing myself, but that I was learning now. At 63, I was finally learning who I was without him. It is almost a year later now as I tell you this story. John and I are legally divorced. The papers were finalized last month. I own 100% of DP Loans Inc., which feels strange and liberating and occasionally lonely. I have the Hilton Head house where I spent 2 weeks last summer sitting on the beach and remembering what it feels like to breathe without tightness in my chest. I have my Tuesday bridge games with Mary and Susan and Ellen, women who rallied around me during the worst of it and never once asked intrusive questions. I have my coffee with Harry once a month, where we sit at that diner and laugh about how stupid people can be when they underestimate a woman who knows how to read a balance sheet. Harry tells me stories about his other clients, the messes people make of their lives, and somehow it makes me feel less alone. The company is doing well. Better than well, actually. We are growing at a sustainable pace, 15% revenue increase this year. We opened a second office in Columbus. We hired 3 new loan officers who actually understand risk management. Linda and I make a good team. She handles the client relationships and the expansion strategy. I handle the underwriting and risk assessment and financial planning. No drama, no affairs, no conspiracies, just competent adults running a business the way it should be run. Marcus Green retired from the board last month and threw himself a party at the country club. He pulled me aside during the cocktail hour and said, "Kate, I owe you an apology. I should have seen what John was doing. I should have questioned things. I let loyalty blind me to reality. I told him it was okay, that we all make mistakes, that he made up for it by supporting me when it mattered. But I appreciated the apology because so few people actually take responsibility for their failures." Do I forgive John? That is the question people keep asking. Usually women my age who have their own stories of betrayal and disappointment. Do you forgive him? Can you forgive him? I do not know yet. Some days I think about the young man who split frozen pizza with me at our kitchen table and promised we were partners in everything, and I miss him, even though he probably never really existed the way I remember. Memory is selective. We edit the past to make it bearable. Other days I think about the man who looked me in the eye and called me dead weight, who conspired with his mistress to steal my life's work, who was willing to destroy me to get what he wanted, and I feel that cold rage again, not burning hot, just cold and clear and unforgiving. Maybe forgiveness is not a single moment. Maybe it is a process that takes years, or maybe it never comes at all and you just learn to live with the scar tissue. You learn to build a new life that does not require forgiveness to be complete, that does not need closure to move forward. What I do know is this: I survived, I fought back, and I won. Not because I was meaner or smarter or luckier than John, but because I knew the truth. I knew what I had built. I knew what I was worth. And I refused to let anyone rewrite that story. I refused to disappear. That is the thing about betrayal, about the kind of deep betrayal that tries to erase your entire contribution to a shared life. It can destroy you if you let it, but it can also clarify everything. It can burn away the lies and the self-doubt and the years of making yourself smaller to make someone else comfortable. And what is left after that fire is just you, raw and scarred and absolutely certain about who you are. I am Kate Becker. I am 63 years old. I built a $42 million company from nothing. I saved that company multiple times when it should have failed. I raised a daughter who is finding her way back to me. I survived a betrayal that would have broken a lot of people. And I am still here, still standing, still building. I started dating again last month, which feels absurd and terrifying and kind of exciting. His name is Richard. He is 68. He teaches economics at Case Western, and he has kind eyes. We met at a lecture series on financial regulation. He asked me to coffee after I asked a question about risk modeling that apparently impressed him. We have been on 3 dates. He knows my story. I told him everything on the second date because I figured if it was going to scare him away, better to know early. He listened, and then he said, "You are remarkable. Most people would have given up." I said, "Giving up was not an option." He said, "That is what makes you remarkable." I do not know if it will go anywhere. Maybe it will, maybe it will not. But the fact that I am willing to try, willing to trust again, even in small ways, feels like a victory. My question for you, the one I think about sometimes late at night when the house is quiet and I am alone with my thoughts, is this. If you found out tomorrow that someone you trusted completely had been planning your destruction for years, Would you fight back? Would you have the courage to stand up and say, no, this is not how my story ends? Or would you convince yourself that it is easier to walk away, to take the unfair settlement, to smile and pretend the betrayal never cut as deep as it did? Would you have the strength to gather evidence, to hire lawyers, to face down the person who promised to love you and expose their lies? Because that is the hard part, not the anger. Anger is easy. The hard part is actually doing something about it, actually fighting when fighting is messy and expensive and emotionally exhausting, actually standing up for yourself when everyone around you is suggesting you should just move on, just accept the loss, just be grateful for what you have left. I hope you never have to answer that question. I truly hope your life is simpler than mine was, that the people you trust are worthy of that trust, that the promises made to you are kept. But if you do find yourself in that position, if you do wake up one day and realize you have been betrayed in a fundamental way, I hope you remember this story. I hope you remember that documentation matters, that lawyers matter, that knowing your worth matters, that having allies like Harry and Marcus and Dana matters, that asking for help is not weakness, and that sometimes the best revenge is not revenge at all. It is just refusing to disappear. It is building a life so full and so complete that the person who tried to destroy you becomes irrelevant. A footnote, a cautionary tale you tell at dinner parties. I see John occasionally at business events, the kind of functions you cannot avoid when you work in the same industry, in the same city. We are professionally polite. We do not speak about personal things. He looks older, tired in a way that has nothing to do with age. I heard through the grapevine that he is seeing someone, a woman closer to his age who runs a real estate investment firm. Good for him. I genuinely mean that. I want him to find whatever happiness he can, not because I am particularly magnanimous, but because his happiness or unhappiness no longer affects me. He is not my concern anymore. My concern is DP loans. My concern is Emily's upcoming visit next month. My concern is whether to get the deck refinished this spring or wait another year. Normal concerns, ordinary life, and that, more than anything else, feels like winning. Thanks for watching until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life experiences and dramatic turns. Drop a comment and let me know if you have ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, or if you have ever watched someone try to rewrite history to make themselves the hero while erasing your contributions. I read every single comment, and your stories matter to me. They help other viewers realize they are not alone. This channel exists because people like you share their experiences and help each other navigate the messy, complicated, sometimes heartbreaking reality of relationships and betrayal and finding your way back to yourself. Remember, the stories shared here are based on real viewer experiences, adapted and anonymized to protect privacy. They reflect genuine emotions and real situations that people face every day. If you are going through something similar right now, know this. You are stronger than you think. You deserve better than betrayal. And it is never too late to stand up for yourself. Document everything. Find good lawyers. Trust your instincts. And do not let anyone make you feel like you are crazy for noticing what is right in front of you. Until next time, take care of yourself and remember that you are worth fighting for. Your story is not over. It is just beginning.